Welcome back guys, new Cyberpunk video. It's really time to show you some new incredibly game-breaking things which we have found during the past months, which will give you multiple times the damage than from our previous builds. With all those new tricks, this build will have an insane amount of 250% critical damage at 100% chance, and we also add an additional 80% melee damage. These are probably the highest stats you have ever seen for this game after patch 2.0. And boy oh boy, this build is just melting everything, no matter which weapon you play with, but especially when you pick melee weapons such as katanas, you will literally destroy this game at sight. You can literally run around with the Batsing Shong and blow up everything, but where this build is really shining is in melee damage. You can actually kill a whole max deck group within just a matter of seconds. This build seriously needs a new difficulty because it makes the game so easy that you will even pile up every max deck group right where they dropped. I've done this so many times and they literally stand no chance even on the highest difficulty. And during all that, you will never be even close to take any serious damage. A major thing which we have added to our already incredible build is the new deep field damage trick, because when you use the deep field visual interface, it gives you an additional % for every point you put on cool. That means you will not only get 25% critical damage from cool, but instead you will get 45% critical damage when you max out cool. But this trick alone will only give you around 105% critical damage. To max out your critical damage even further, you can add Berserk. That will give you an additional 100%, topping out at 200% critical damage. But even better is when you also combine this with the Edgerunners perk, which will give you an additional 50%, so that you are at an incredible 250% critical damage. And at that point, you will literally melt everything, including max stack, with just 1 or 2 strikes. But we can double up this damage again if we add over 80% additional melee damage. For that we have to use the Cyberware stats reroll and add melee damage on every item. Simply buy a cheap Cyberware such as subdermal armor and then upgrade it until you find melee damage perks in the far right slots, because only these two slots can also be applied to different Cyberware slots. Simply upgrade it and check again if the stats have changed to something with melee damage. Every time you upgrade your Cyberware, the two far right slots will have different stats. And this time we got melee damage on the far right one. So what we do now is we don't upgrade the subdermal armor, instead we'll purchase something else, such as Heal on Kill, which is a much more expensive Cyberware, and on Heal on Kill we can then apply the melee damage roll which we previously got from subdermal armor. You can do this for every Cyberware you own and put melee damage on every item you own to get over 80%. 80% more melee damage means that you will almost double up your base damage before you multiply it with critical damage. So if you have 100% base damage and you add another 80%, then multiply this by a factor of 3.5, you will get over 6 times the initial damage. But damage is not everything, we also have to take care about our healing. For that we'll use Biomonitor combined with the Borrowed Time perk, which gives us an infinite amount of healing items. And instead of going for Blood Pump, we will use a standard max stock combined with Heal on Kill. The standard max stock will give us more health per charge, and Heal on Kill will give us more health over time when we kill our enemies. Since max stocks also will have no animation, this is a way better combination to use. And the final trick we are going to use for this build is the Quantum Tuner, which almost gives us infinite duration. No matter if you want to use Sandevistan or Cyberpunk Berserk, you will get up to 40 seconds plus the additional time from kills. And especially by using Berserk, you will be able to almost infinitely keep up this ability. So while playing Berserk, you are actually able to trigger the Reflex Tuner with the help of Quantum Tuner to have Berserk damage and slow time active at the same time, which is in my opinion the absolute best combination. But even if you don't want to use Berserk all the time, the standard 100% critical damage of this build will make the Batsing Shong an absolute destructive tool. If you want to add a good long range option, I definitely recommend to get the Raiju. That is basically the only weapon that will never slow down, no matter if you want to use Sandevistan or the Reflex Tuner together with it. Or you go all in for David Martinez playstyle, which can either use Sandevistan or Berserk with Infinite Reflex Tuner, which will probably give you the best and most powerful David Martinez build ever. But now let's finally check out the build, guys. By the way, if you want me to create more of these crazy builds, consider to become a Patreon or a YouTube member or check out our Discord server. Our first weapon of choice, of course, will be the Byaku. The Byaku is on high level, basically the fastest hitting blade in the game. Of course, you can also optionally go for the Errata or any other melee weapon like baseball bats or Tinkerbell, for example. In the second weapon slot, I would put the Batsing Chong. The Batsing Chong is simply the most powerful shotgun in the game, however it also suffers from a very slow reload. Alternatively to that, you can of course go for the Sovereign, which is in my opinion almost as strong as the Batsing Chong and has a better reload. For the Sovereign, of course, you should rather go for Micro Generator instead of the Smart Link. In the third slot, then you can put the Raiju if you want to have a mid-range to long-range weapon. The Raiju with this build is actually really strong because it also has already 30% critical damage by itself, which can easily be further increased to up to 60% with the sharpshooter perks from the reflex tree. For the operating system, you should go for the Cyberware Berserk, which not only makes you invincible, but also gives you the highest possible damage, especially when you go for a melee build. The Cyberware Berserk is actually better than the Militech Berserk because it lets your health go down to 25%, which still allows you to trigger the reflex tuner, so you have the best of both worlds when you use the Cyberware Berserk. You have slow time almost active every time, including the damage increase from the Cyberware Berserk itself. Of course, you can also go for Sandevistan here if you want, but Cyberware Berserk is definitely the smarter choice. We will go for the Gorilla Arms in the electrified version to get the most damage possible, especially when you hit robots. Then we will use the Smart Link when we have the Batsing Chong. Again, if you use the Sovereign, you should switch that for the Micro Generator. Make sure that you have melee damage on all possible Cyberware items. For the health item, we will just use a standard max stock, which is actually better than Blood Pump. It gives us more health per initial charge, and we can also save up capacity to use heal on kill or anything else. This build will give you the basic stats of 105% critical damage. However, if you activate Berserk, you will easily put this to 200% critical damage and 95% crit chance. And if you additionally trigger the Edge Runners perk, you will get over 255%, which will be totally insane, especially in combination with an additional 80% melee damage. For this build, I've used up to 356 Cyberware capacity. 360 would be the normal capacity limit if you collected every single shard in the game, and 356 is the maximum if you have only 4 attributes over 9. If you don't have exactly that amount of capacity because you are missing several shards, make sure that you definitely use the mandatory Cyberware and only remove something which is not marked as mandatory. A lot of the used Cyberware have great synergy effects together with each other. For example, your operating system gets prolonged by the Quantum Tuner, Reflex Tuner and the Axolotl. And the Reflex Tuner and Biomonitor together with Borrowed Time allows you to get infinite amounts of healing items, which is extremely helpful, and you should definitely use that in your build. Of course, the stats on every item are highly selective. I have made sure that I have melee damage on almost every possible item, except for the ones which already had very good stats. In the frontal cortex, you should go for the Mechatronic Core to get increased damage against robots. Then we go for the Quantum Tuner, which is only possible to obtain if you help Songbird to get to the moon. Since I've already upgraded the Quantum Tuner, I couldn't change its stats anymore, but if you collect it again, you may already even add melee damage on the Quantum Tuner. Then of course we'll go for the Axolotl. The Axolotl is one of the most mandatory and game-breaking items because it reduces every cooldown of all additional items, including Reflex Tuner, Second Heart or whatever you want to use. But more importantly, it also prolongs the effect of Sandevistan and Berserk. Especially for Berserk, when you make so many kills, it is extremely easy to keep it up almost infinitely together with Axolotl. You can of course also use Sandevistan here instead if you prefer a Sandevistan build, but then you will also have to remove several other Cyberware because you would need an additional 20 capacity for it. Then of course we'll go for the Kiroshi Cockatrice Optics, which gives us an additional 35% crit chance. I was really lucky to get a 3% crit damage roll, so I engraved it on one of my most valuable items, which are the Cockatrice Optics. In a true melee build, of course, we should also use something in our arm slots. I picked the electrified gorilla arms, but you can of course also use the electrified mantis blades. I always use electric damage because I found it to be the most powerful, especially against robots. In the skeleton slots, we'll go for the epimorphic skeleton. I managed to get a 5.7% melee damage roll for it. Then we go for bionic joints, where I have 6.4% melee damage. And then we go for dance marrow, which itself already has 27% melee damage. And I got a another 4.5% melee damage roll for it. In the nervous system, we will go for Stabber, which gives us an additional 20% crit chance when we use our blades, and of course the Reflex Tuner, which allows us in combination with the Quantum Tuner and Berserk to have slow time and the Berserk damage almost active every time. But the most important item here in the nervous system is definitely the Deep Field Visual Interface, which gives you an additional 1% critical damage for every attribute point you put on Cool. That means you will get a total of 45% critical damage if you have Cool 20. And this damage will be applied to every weapon, which also includes melee weapons. Even though this item is mainly used to increase your crit chance for long-range weapons, the real benefit is the additional 20% critical damage, which will be applied to your whole build. The additional critical damage makes it worth to use in every build, including your Netrunner builds. I've also put my highest melee damage roll with 6.7% on this item, so that I never have to change it again. In the integumentary system, you definitely have to go for Shock and Awe. Shock and Awe is not only giving you a big amount of armor, it also deals 500 electric damage to all your enemies around you, which is often enough to kill a whole group of enemies before you even hit them. Shock and Awe is an extremely powerful item and absolutely mandatory. Then we will go for Carapace. Carapace is great if you're surrounded by a lot of enemies because it increases your armor if you're attacked from behind or from the sides. And then we go for Subdermal Armor for another cheap armor increase. On Subdermal Armor, I also got my highest crit damage roll with 3.1% critical damage out of over 100 rolls. In our hand slot, I use a Smart Link for the Batsing Shong, and I got a really great roll with melee damage and critical damage on the same item. However, if you want to play with the Sovereign instead, you should use a Micro Generator. Also make sure to get melee damage and, if possible, critical damage on top of it. In the circulatory system, I went for Heal on Kill, so I was able to fill out all Cyberware slots, which always gives us additional melee damage if you get melee damage for them. However, you can of course also use Second Heart, but then you will have to remove the Mechatronic Core and your Gorilla Arms. Absolutely mandatory is of course the Biomonitor, which triggers the automatic healing, and then I went for the Micro Rotors for the increased attack speed. In the leg slots, of course, we go for the Reinforced Tendons for the double jump, and of course on all these items I got additional melee damage. If you go for the stats reroll, you should only focus to get one perfect stat. For example, melee damage, headshot damage or stealth damage, and then make sure that the secondary or third stats are not entirely rubbish. For example, you can get health, armor or health item recharge speed. These occur very often, and if you get them together with melee damage, headshot damage or stealth damage, they are perfect to engrave on all your Cyberware. Regarding the skills, I went for a really small change to get the absolute maximum possible damage out of this build, so I went for Cool 20 to get the maximum amount of critical damage. However, if you have an existing build that has 20 Reflex and 18 Cool, you can of course also change Reflex and Cool and go for that, but then you will lose around 5% critical damage. In the body tree, we will go for all the standard stuff here at the bottom, especially Dorphead, which will give you 100% mitigation chance whenever you use a healing item. Then you go for Adrenaline and everything that improves your adrenaline, and the finisher will give you an additional 20% health item recharge speed, which is always extremely good. If you want to play with the shotguns like Batsing Shong or the Sovereign, you should go for the shotgun tree with Die 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 and then the Spontaneous Obliteration, and also Close Quarters Carnage, which increases the chance of obliteration. All that is extremely helpful because whenever you obliterate an enemy with the Bloodlust perk, you will get an additional adrenaline boost. For a true David Martinez build, you can of course also improve your blunt weapons, but that was not the main focus for my build. The most important perks in the reflex tree are Flash and Thunderclap, which makes you leap forward to your enemy and perform an incredibly strong attack, and of course the blade finishers. So you go for Slippery, Dash, Lead and Steal and everything that leads to Flash and Thunderclap, then you go for all the finisher improvement and also Air Dash. Since I also love to use the Raiju in this build a lot, I also went for the SMG tree. So I went for Ready, Rested, Reloaded and everything that improves it, and especially the Sharpshooter perk, which also gives you additional crit chance and critical damage for every hit you make with your weapon. So you can easily get over 60% additional critical damage with the Raiju. In the tech tree, of course, we'll go for the middle branch with all things Cyber, License to Chrome and the Edgerunners perk, which will give us the additional elusive 50% critical damage. And the more you go into the red with your capacity, the more likely you are to trigger this effect and have this active in your combat every time. Since we also have all Cyberware slots filled, it is really cool to get the Cyborg perk for the additional 15% reduced cooldown. Then we go for Extended Warranty for the increased duration. Chrome Constitution will give you 5% reduced incoming damage, and the Renaissance Punk will give you +4 Cyberware capacity for every attribute that is over 9. And especially for the Cyberware stats reroll, it is really important that you get Driver Update and Shipware Connoisseur, because only with Shipware Connoisseur you are able to choose between 2 additional sets on the right side. To increase your survival abilities, you should absolutely go for the left freak, Glutton for War, Health freak, Pyromania, go for Heat Shield and Friendly Fire, and then the most important perk in the Andrea tree is Borrowed Time. This is the secret God mode perk that gives you a free health item charge whenever you make a kill at low health. This perk is an absolute lifesaver that will get you out of every tough situation, especially if you also have Reflex Tuner, which will slow down time whenever you are low health. Also, don't forget to get the other perks to further improve your health items. In the cool tree, we actually don't really go for anything, because all the points in cool are only used to get 45% additional critical damage. However, if you want to, you can get Feline Footwork, but this really only works when you are crouching. If you want to make a stealth build, you can go for Killer Instinct. And if you want to play with pistols or with sniper rifles, you can of course go for Focus and Deadeye. You can of course use the points which I spent on the SMG tree and just use it here on the cool tree. The relic tree is not really that important. The most relevant perks for this build are probably the vulnerabilities, and if you want to play with Mantis Blades, go for the Mantis Blade upgrade. I hope you really enjoyed this new build. Please don't forget to subscribe, leave me a like, and see you next time.